Okay, so someone sent us Adam Conover's article, Why Trump's Tariffs Are Insanely Numb. And it definitely caught our eye.
Yeah, it's a strong title.
It is. And you clearly wanted us to dig into it, get past the headline, understand the nuts and
Makes
bolts.
sense. It's a complex topic.
Exactly. So that's what we're doing today, this deep dive. We're going to dissect Conover's main arguments, look at the specific examples he uses.
Like how these tariffs actually worked or didn't work
Yeah.
in the real world.
Right. And who got hit the hardest, and what alternatives the article suggests. Conover's style is kind of interesting, blends humor and research.
It does. It makes a serious subject maybe a bit more accessible.
We'll try and capture some of that vibe as we go.
Sounds good. So
Okay.
the piece itself, it tackles this idea of international trade, which can feel pretty abstract, right?
Totally. Very distant.
But he grounds it, connected to real consequences, and his central point is pretty, well, blunt.
Yeah, he doesn't mince words.
No, he argues these tariffs weren't some, like, carefully calibrated economic plan. Instead, they seem, according to him, rooted in, let's say, flawed economics, misunderstandings,
And the result.
ultimately causing more harm than good for American businesses, consumers, the whole economy.
Okay, so let's dive right into that core argument then. The article basically says these policies are built on shaky foundations, maybe questionable math.
Yeah, and potentially fueled by a long-held personal view against trade is sort of the implication.
Right. And the upshot, Conover says, is this whole cascade of negative stuff.
Yeah.
Higher prices for us consumers, real problems for small businesses, not actually bringing back manufacturing like promised.
Which is a big selling point.
Huge. And just generally straining global trade, our relationships.
Absolutely. And the article really highlights the immediate fallout, that instability it created.
With the stock market.
Exactly. Big swings in the market, lots of uncertainty for businesses trying to plan ahead.
And it wasn't just Wall Street, right? It was everyday stuff, too.
Yeah, think about price jumps or maybe delays for things like iPhones, olive oil, even video games. He mentions Nintendo's Metroid Prime 4 specifically.
Wow, okay.
And what really struck me was how even just the rumor of a tariff change could send markets spinning.
Yeah.
That kind of reaction, that volatility, it's not really a sign of a healthy, stable economy.
No, it suggests a lot of nervousness. So, building on that instability, the article then looks at the why, the reasoning behind the tariffs.
It basically calls it mathematical and strategic nonsense. Pretty strong words.
Very strong. He talks about alleged errors in the administration's own justifications. He even points to criticism from, like, conservative think tanks.
Yeah, the American Enterprise Institute, for example.
Yeah.
Which is, notable.
It is. And then you get these examples that sound almost absurd, like tariffs on countries where the U.S. actually has a trade surplus.
Or the island of penguins, the example he uses to illustrate the point.
That one really jumped out. Taxing penguins because they don't buy enough American stuff. It highlights this, like, obsession with perfectly balanced trade with everyone.
Exactly. And the example of, say, a small developing country like Lutu getting penalized because they just don't have the money to buy more U.S. goods.
It just doesn't make economic sense in that context.
It underscores this apparent disconnect from, well, economic reality.
Right.
It didn't seem strategic, according to the article, just rigid.
Driven by this one idea. Balanced trade or else.
Right, which makes you question the whole foundation of the policy.
And that questionable logic, as the article lays it out, it hits us directly in the wallet.
Because tariffs, at the end of the day...
Taxes, right. Taxes on imports.
Exactly. So when tariffs go on goods coming into the U.S., who pays?
We do. Consumers. Higher prices on, well, everything. Diapers, paper towels, avocados, shoes. Stuff we buy constantly.
Yeah, and it's really important to think about who feels that the most.
Lower-income families?
Precisely. They spend a bigger chunk of their income on basic necessities. So a price hike that might seem small to some
Can be a major strain for others.
It's not abstract economics at that point. It's a real burden.
Okay, so let's shift to the big promise. Manufacturing jobs. The whole buy American, hire American idea, that was central.
It was. But the article pushes back hard on that.
How so?
It argues the economy's changed fundamentally. It's not the 1950s anymore.
You mean services, automation?
Exactly. The rise of the service sector, and maybe even more critically, automation. Those are the big drivers, Conover argues, behind the decline in old-school factory jobs.
And tariffs just can't undo that.
They can't reverse those massive trends, according to the article. It points to places like Germany and Japan.
Import manufacturing, right.
Actively. Yet they've still seen similar declines in factory employment because of those same forces. Automation, global shifts.
And he gives a U.S. example, too.
Yeah, Hess Automation, a
Yeah.
U.S. company that makes factory tools, they actually had to cut production.
Why? Because of tariffs.
Yeah, because tariffs messed up their supply chains and hurt demand of their products. So an American manufacturer, hurt by the policy, meant to help them.
Wow. That really shows the interconnectedness, the unintended consequences.
Definitely.
So it sounds like, based on Conover's analysis, Trump's own long-held views, his skepticism about international trade.
A view he's apparently had for decades.
That might have been more the driver than any, specific economic strategy.
That's the suggestion.
Yeah.
That it was more of a fundamental belief and anti-trade stance, even if it caused all this uncertainty.
Uncertainty even on Wall Street, people who usually like policies that boost profits.
Right. It suggests maybe it wasn't primarily an economic policy, but more ideological.
And that lack of a clear economic rationale is maybe why you saw the volatility and the negative outcomes.
It created a very unpredictable situation for businesses. Hard to make long-term plans.
And speaking of businesses, especially small and medium-sized ones, the article says they were hit particularly hard.
Yeah, there's a really striking statistic in there. Something like 41% of goods imported from China go to these smaller U.S. businesses.
41%. That's huge.
It is. So when you slap on a big tariff, he uses a hypothetical 125% example. It could just be devastating.
Wipes them out, potentially.
Potentially.
Yeah.
Think about Etsy creators using imported materials, local plumbers needing specific parts, small online shops, niche hardware makers.
They don't have the resources to just absorb that kind of cost increase.
Exactly. And it shows how deep these imports go. Like the example of 3D printers and their materials often coming from China.
Right. It affects creators, innovators.
Yeah, people making things right here. It's not just big corporations. These tariffs acted like a sudden, massive tax hike on the little guys.
The backbone of local economies, often.
Often, yeah.
The article also touches on this nostalgia for factory jobs, mid-20th century work.
Right. And it makes an interesting point there.
Which is?
That maybe what people miss isn't the actual work on the assembly line, which could be pretty repetitive. But the fact that those jobs often came with union protection, good wages, benefits, stability.
Ah, so it's the conditions associated with the jobs, not just the jobs themselves.
That's the argument Conover makes. And he suggests Trump's vision of bringing factories back didn't necessarily include recreating those same pro-worker conditions.
That's a really crucial distinction. It's about economic security, fair treatment.
Which came from things like unions and a different kind of social safety net back then. Just having a factory isn't enough if the conditions aren't good.
So if tariffs are the wrong tool, according to the article, what's the alternative? What's the better way forward?
Well, it lays out a few core ideas. Things like strengthening labor unions, giving workers more power.
Okay. What else?
Expanding the social safety net. Things like better unemployment support, maybe paid parental leave, policies that help families directly.
And focusing the economy more broadly.
Yeah, reorienting things to prioritize, average Americans, not just the wealthy few at the top.
So it's a totally different approach. Instead of trade barriers.
It's about investing directly in people, in workers, in families. Doesn't matter where the goods are made. Focus on supporting Americans here.
That really prompts a bigger question, doesn't it? What does a good, fair American economy look like now in the 21st century?
A really important question.
And just to hammer home the impact, Conover includes a table, right, summarizing who gets hurt.
Yes, it's quite stark. You've got lower-income Americans facing higher prices, small businesses potentially going under.
U.S. consumers generally paying thousands more per year was the estimate.
Around $4,700 per household annually, yeah. Then people looking for those manufacturing jobs, maybe finding they aren't coming back because of automation or even retaliatory tariffs.
Right. Other countries hit back.
And then this point about wealthy allies potentially benefiting by controlling supply chains.
So the pain wasn't spread evenly at all.
No. The article suggests the main burden fell on ordinary folks and small businesses, while maybe concentrating power elsewhere.
So that conclusion, what's the final message from Conover?
It's really a call to action for a different kind of economic movement.
Based on?
Justice, dignity, shared prosperity. It stresses solidarity, worker rights, progressive policies. That's the path forward, not trade wars.
So challenging the simple answers, pushing for a rethink of priorities?
Exactly. Building strength from the bottom up, empowering people, rather than trying to build walls.
Okay. So wrapping this up, thinking about everything Conover laid out, It really makes you wonder, doesn't it?
About
About what American-made even means today. With global supply chains so tangled, with automation continuing, is it even possible or desirable to completely pull back?
that's the big question. Or is the real challenge figuring out how to make this interconnectedness work better for everyone?
Maybe the real solutions are more in line with what the article suggests towards the end. Stronger unions, better safety nets, focusing on worker dignity.
Rather than just protectionism. It definitely gives you a lot to chew on thinking about where the U.S. economy goes from here.